My name is Lieutenant Andrea Carter, U.S. Navy. 13 years in uniform, 2 deployments overseas, a commendation for field leadership, and no history of misconduct. I never imagined my most defining moment wouldn't be a battlefield decision, but a silent choice I made in a blizzard. It started on a Thursday. I remember because I was halfway through a bowl of oatmeal when the duty officer walked in and handed me the summons. Formal hearing. Allegations of abandoning formation. Violating protocol during active training. I kept rereading the words, like they were written in another language. My stomach didn't twist, it sank. I reported in full dress, white gloves, ribbon bar. The corridor to the courtroom was lined with faces I had known for years. No one spoke, but their silence was louder than anything I'd heard in combat. At the end of the hallway, I saw the tribunal officers through the open door. Stone-faced, unreadable. I stood before them, hands clasped behind my back, spine straight. They read the charges aloud, and I answered clearly. Yes, I had left my position. Yes, I had removed my issued jacket. Yes, I had acted without waiting for permission. But what I didn't say out loud was the question burning in me since that day. Since when did saving a child's life become an offense? That morning during the snowstorm, the kind where you can't tell horizon from ground, my unit had been conducting cold weather readiness drills. I was second in the column when I saw a flash of color against the white. It was fast, like the blink of a flare. I halted. My boots crunched sideways off the marked path as I stepped toward it. There was a boy, maybe 6 years old, huddled near a fence post, lips blue, snow crusted into his lashes. I didn't think. I just moved. My jacket was off and wrapped around him before I even looked back. I remember the way his body felt in my arms. Light. Too light. His breathing was shallow, but he was alive. I carried him toward the service road we'd just passed. Radioed for help. They said I'd broken protocol, left formation, and disrupted training command. That part came later. In the courtroom, they didn't ask me how cold it was, or how fast a child's core temperature can drop below safe levels. They asked about directives, chain of command, my precise coordinates when I left the line. The hearing wasn't about humanity. It was about hierarchy. I understood that. But I also knew what I did was right. People think the hardest part of serving is the danger. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's when you're forced to defend a decision that saved someone because it didn't fit the manual. That was the part I hadn't prepared for. And standing there, in that courtroom, I realized something even colder than that storm. They weren't angry that I acted. They were angry that I acted alone. That morning, the snow came sideways. It wasn't falling. It was being hurled by wind so fierce. It stung through 2 layers of gear. The cold had teeth, and every breath felt like swallowing glass. We were about an hour into our march. Visibility was maybe 30 feet. Tops. White swallowed everything. Sky, ground, road markers, even sound. I could hear my own heartbeat louder than the crunch of boots ahead of me. We moved in single file, heads down, focusing on our own footing. Training in these conditions wasn't new to me, but this storm felt personal, like it had a point to make. My hands were numb inside my gloves, and the radio crackled uselessly. Even the squad leader's voice was muted by the wind. That's when I saw it. A flicker of red, just outside the line of march, near the edge of a chain-link fence that separated the base perimeter from a row of long-abandoned cabins. At first, I thought it was a marker, maybe debris. I almost kept going. But something about it wasn't right. The shape was too small, too still. I slowed my pace, squinting through the blur, trying to make sense of it. And then it moved. Barely. Just enough. I stepped out of line without a word. A few of the others turned their heads, confused, but no one said anything. I veered off the path, boots sinking into snow that came halfway up my calves. Each step pulled at my legs, like the storm didn't want me going there. When I reached the fence, I dropped to one knee. It was a boy, curled up, shivering so violently it made his whole body twitch. His coat was thin, soaked through. His cheeks were raw, and his lips were cracked and purple. I touched his shoulder. He didn't flinch. He was fading. There wasn't time to think about protocols. There wasn't even time to weigh the consequences. I peeled off my jacket and wrapped it around him. My hands trembled not from the cold, but from how fast the decision had come. The rules said to stay in formation. The rules said to maintain the line. But the rules didn't say what to do when a 6-year-old is about to die in front of you. I scooped him into my arms. He was light, too light, like a bundle of sticks barely holding together. His breath came in soft puffs against my chest. I turned back toward the road, shouting for the medic. My voice barely carried in the wind. Someone caught up to me, then another. Eventually, the medic got there and started checking his vitals. We radioed for transport, and within minutes, a snowcat from base rolled up. They loaded him inside. I stood there, jacketless, soaked, and waited for the reprimand, because I knew it was coming. Even as my chest burned from the cold, even as I watched the boy disappear inside that vehicle, I knew I'd broken the chain of command. No one needed to say it. I could see it in the looks my team gave me. Conflicted, quiet, like they wanted to thank me, but also wanted to step away. The medic later told me his core temperature had dropped dangerously low. Minutes more and he wouldn't have made it. That should have been the end of it. A child was safe. The cost was a uniform jacket. But in the military, sometimes it's not the act itself, it's who made the call. And I made it alone. 2 days later, I was in the mess hall, halfway through a rehydrated beef stew, when a staff sergeant approached my table. He leaned down and said someone was asking for me outside. I wasn't expecting anyone. I hadn't spoken to family in weeks. I stepped into the cold, confused. An older man was standing near the edge of the walkway, bundled in a wool coat that looked too formal for base visits. His face was sharp, but there was something familiar about the way he held himself. He didn't look like someone who wandered here by accident. He walked toward me slowly. His eyes studied me in a way that felt more personal than official. When he stopped a few feet away, he spoke in a low voice, careful but direct. He said he had something that belonged to me. My jacket, to be specific. The one I'd taken off during the storm. I didn't know what to say. I'd assumed it was gone, left behind in the scramble. But he nodded as if reading my thoughts and said it was at his house, that his grandson had been found wearing it when the medics brought him in. My heart caught. I asked him how the boy was. He told me he was doing well. The hospital staff said if he had been out there another 15 minutes, he wouldn't have made it. He paused, eyes fixed on mine, and added that the boy hadn't been supposed to be outside that morning. He had slipped out while his parents were distracted. It wasn't anyone's fault, just bad timing and a fast-moving storm. Then he reached into his coat and pulled out a folded paper. It was a photo. The boy. Freckles across his nose, missing front tooth, wrapped in my uniform jacket like a blanket. He said the boy wouldn't let them take it off for hours. Said it made him feel safe. I was still holding the photo when I realized what had been bothering me about this man's posture. The squared shoulders. The tone of authority that wasn't being forced, just assumed. I looked closer at the insignia on his collar, barely visible under the scarf. It hit me like a wave of ice down my spine. Admiral Raymond, the base commander. I'd seen him before, of course. Briefings, ceremonies, but never this close. Never like this. He didn't introduce himself. He didn't have to. I stood straighter out of instinct, but he waved it off. He said he came as a grandfather, not a flag officer. That's how he put it. Then he thanked me. Not with ceremony, just with a quiet, sincere look that lingered before he turned and walked away. I stood there, jacketless again, holding the photo in my hand. My fingers were trembling, but not from the cold. Part of me hoped that was the end of it. But another part knew better. When someone that high up enters your life, it never ends quietly. I thought maybe things would settle down after the Admiral's visit. That naive part of me, the part that still believed merit was enough, hoped that his quiet thank you meant the matter was closed. But 3 days later, I got an official notice that turned my stomach. I was being charged with insubordination and abandonment of duty. The language was cold, clinical, and deliberate. The kind of phrasing you only see when someone wants it to stick. The report claimed I had left formation without explanation, refused direct orders to return, and disrupted a classified winter readiness exercise. There were no notes about the child, no mention of the rescue, just line after line of protocol violations, signed and submitted by Captain Monroe. Captain Derek Monroe had always been a professional thorn. We'd served in the same unit for over a year, and while we never had open conflict, the tension between us was undeniable. I was promoted ahead of him. Twice, I took the lead on ops that he thought belonged to him. I made calls that contradicted his. And worse, those calls usually worked. Still, I never expected him to play it this way. I read the report 3 times, hoping I'd miss something. But it was all there. A timeline that made it seem like I wandered off without cause. A statement from a junior enlisted, cherry-picked out of context. Technical jargon meant to make me look reckless instead of reactive. When I tried to access the after-action footage, I was told the recording from our unit's helmet cams had been corrupted due to weather interference. That didn't sit right. These systems are built for combat zones, not just storms. I filed a request for manual recovery. It disappeared. The next day, I was pulled aside by a fellow officer who had heard whispers that this wasn't just about my actions, that Monroe had already been lobbying for my reassignment months earlier. He saw me as competition in a promotion cycle that was about to open. I asked him why he was telling me this now. He said that because what happened in that storm was the excuse Monroe had been waiting for. I couldn't sleep that night. My thoughts were on fire. I kept replaying the rescue in my mind, as if maybe I had overlooked some part of it, some error that could justify this mess. But the truth was simple. I'd made a call that saved a life, and someone with more rank, more ambition, and more bitterness had decided that made me expendable. What hit hardest wasn't the paperwork or the politics, it was the silence. The people I'd trained with, deployed with, shared MREs and snowblind headaches with, they didn't say a word. Not a nod in the hall, not a quiet "you okay?" Just averted eyes and closed doors. In a system built on order and structure, I'd stepped out of line once, and someone was using it to erase everything else I'd ever done right. I was angry. Not the kind of rage you yell into a pillow, but the colder kind, the kind that settles in your chest and waits. I wasn't going to fold, but I also knew I couldn't fight this the normal way. Not with rules, not with rank. I needed something more, something undeniable, and I had no idea where it would come from. I hit my lowest point 1 week before the hearing. The official charges had been locked. My request for additional evidence was denied. The base legal officer gave me that look, the one that says, "You're not guilty, but you're still going down." I sat alone in the barracks lounge one evening, staring at the floor like it owed me answers. I wasn't afraid of consequences. I was afraid that the truth didn't matter anymore, that doing the right thing was just a slogan for recruitment posters. I kept replaying it in my head. The snow, the boy, the way his body barely moved in my arms. That moment didn't feel like a choice. It felt like instinct. And now, it was being framed as insubordination. That disconnect was breaking something in me. That's when he found me. He didn't introduce himself at first, just walked up quietly and asked if I had a second. I recognized him vaguely. Older guy, maintenance uniform. I'd seen him around the admin buildings, always carrying a mop or pushing a cart of supplies. He said he worked night shifts in the logistics wing. I nodded, not sure why he was talking to me. Then he looked around, lowered his voice, and said he'd overheard something. A conversation in one of the briefing rooms, after hours, between Captain Monroe and another officer. He didn't catch everything, but the words cover it, and no one will question that the report stood out. He said it didn't sit right with him. Not then, not now. I felt my heart crawl up into my throat. He looked me dead in the eye and said he'd gone back the next day, and checked the trash bins in the equipment room. Found a data stick labeled Raw Helmet Cam Footage, Unit Echo. It had been halfway snapped, like someone tried to break it, but didn't finish the job. He said he fixed it. Had to get a little creative, used a soldering pen and some patience. Took him 3 days. He didn't tell anyone, just waited to see if I looked like I needed help. He handed it to me right there. Small, plain, worn at the edges. I stared at it like it was radioactive. My fingers closed around it slowly. I asked him why he was doing this. He smiled and said that because his daughter was the same age as that boy, and because he was tired of watching decent people get steamrolled. I thanked him, but the words didn't feel big enough. He nodded and walked away before I could say more. I sat down with the legal officer the next morning. We plugged in the stick. The footage was rough but intact. It showed exactly what I remembered. The blizzard, the boy, my detour from formation, the urgency in my voice when I called for help. It showed that I didn't abandon anything. I responded. We sent it straight to review. The chain of custody would be questioned. The source might be dismissed. But the truth was there, visible in every frozen frame. And just like that, hope cracked through the surface. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It didn't clear my name instantly, but it shifted the air. Someone had listened, someone had acted, and that changed everything. The courtroom felt colder than the storm that started all this. Everything was polished. The flags, the uniforms, the rows of seats, lined with high-ranking officers who barely moved. I sat at the defense table with my spine straight and hands locked, trying to keep the burn in my chest from showing on my face. Captain Monroe stood with confidence. He spoke with clear diction, calm eyes, and a smile that stayed just shy of smug. He repeated his version like it were the only possible truth, that I had abandoned formation without authorization, that I jeopardized the mission, that my actions lacked justification, regardless of the outcome. I kept my eyes on the tribunal, not him. Their expressions didn't change as he spoke, just pens moving, heads slightly nodding. It felt like a formality, like the judgment had already been written. Then my legal officer stood and requested to present new video evidence. There was a stir across the room. One of the tribunal officers leaned forward and asked about the chain of custody. My counsel acknowledged the source, stating it was recovered from a deleted file fragment during internal maintenance review. We played the footage. The screen flickered, then lit up with snow and static. And then the boy appeared, huddled, barely moving, and me breaking from formation, reaching for him, radioing in for help. The room went quiet. Monroe shifted in his seat for the first time. My attorney paused the clip. He asked for the file to be admitted. The tribunal conferred, then nodded. Monroe objected. He said it was inadmissible, not formally logged, and lacked credibility. The door opened behind us. Heavy steps echoed through the room. Admiral Raymond entered in full dress uniform. No announcement, no escort. Just walked straight down the aisle and stood in front of the tribunal. He introduced himself without a title, only as a witness. He confirmed the child in the video was his grandson, confirmed that I had saved the boy's life, and that without my intervention, the child would not have survived. His voice didn't shake. It didn't rise. It landed like a verdict. He looked directly at Monroe and asked him what protocol would have allowed a soldier to walk past a dying child. Monroe didn't answer. The tribunal recessed for deliberation. 20 minutes passed in slow silence. When they returned, they dismissed the charges in full. No reprimand, no record. The findings stated that my actions, though technically outside procedure, were justified by exigent circumstance and resulted in the preservation of human life. As the room began to shift, people stood, but no one moved toward the exit. Admiral Raymond turned to me, stepped forward, and offered a full salute. It was deliberate, held for a count longer than regulation. I returned it, unsure if my hand was shaking from emotion or relief. That moment changed everything. Not just because I was cleared, but because the room had seen it. All of them. The power of a decision, made in silence, under pressure, for the right reasons. When the Admiral lowered his hand, the officers in the front row followed. One by one. A room that had once held judgment now stood in respect. I didn't cry. Not until I got outside. Justice didn't come loud. It came like that salute. Clear, simple, and enough. I've thought a lot about that storm. Not just the snow or the cold, but the moment I made a choice that changed everything. It didn't feel heroic when I did it. It felt necessary. Like the kind of thing you do before you even know you're doing it. People always talk about courage like it's loud. But most of the courage I've seen in this life is quiet. It looks like stepping forward when no one else does. Like helping someone even when it costs you. Like holding the line not for orders, but for what you know is right. I'm not the same officer I was before that day. I still follow protocol. I still respect the chain of command. But I've learned that integrity doesn't always wear a uniform. And sometimes, the real measure of leadership is how you act when the rulebook falls short. That janitor didn't owe me anything. He saw something wrong and chose to do something about it. Not for credit. Not for recognition. Just because it mattered. That's what sticks with me the most. The truth is, we all get moments like that. Big or small. Sometimes no one sees. Sometimes no one says thank you. But it still counts. If you ever find yourself standing in front of a hard decision, and all the rules say to stay silent while your heart says to move, listen to your heart. It might not make sense to everyone. It might not be easy, but I promise you, it will matter. And if you're lucky, one day someone will look back and say you changed their life, not because you had to, but because you chose to.